around the city.
He wanted to go alone, just the two of them, nobody trailing along.
It was a very sort of intimate moment for them. And it comes out of this buoyancy of, the war is over. We finally can look to our future. All of the self-doubt, somehow is relieved.
A lovely day.
Oh, yes. This is going to be nice.
Lost in a moment of bliss, Lincoln was unaware of the nefarious conspiracy organizing to take his life.
We need to talk.
You look like you're feeling quite well. Giddy, in fact.
She talks about how he's in this giddy mood. This burden is just lifting off.
Lincoln had a very hard time during the war. Not only the responsibilities, the decisions that led to the deaths of thousands of people, but he also lost his son Willie in 1862. That sent Mrs. Lincoln into a spiraling depression.
Willie was just 11 years old when he died.
From what we hear, he was the one that was most like Lincoln.
A Smithsonian treasure reveals a physical reminder of the tragedy.
This is Abraham Lincoln's silk top hat. It has this wide band around it. And this is a mourning band that he added to it for his son who died of typhoid fever in the White House. And he keeps this mourning band on the hat throughout much of the rest of his presidency, that he's tying his mourning with the loss of so many others during the Civil War.
But on this day, they are putting it all behind them.
I consider this day to be truly the end of this war.
She says she wants to go to the capitals of Europe, and he wants to go see the gold mines in California and visit the Holy Land. And he says, this is the beginning of a new life for us.
And then fate steps in and takes it all from them.
Brought to you.
Can you see the Secret Service protection? There's no protection those days.
This is Abraham Lincoln's fine gold pocket watch. And it comes with this incredible story.
When Lincoln took his watch to have it cleaned, jewelers left secret engravings inside.
There's a message that says, on this day, Fort Sumter has been attacked. Thank God we have a government. Another watchmaker who signs his name and dates it a couple years later. And then a third individual scratches in the name Jeff Davis.
The Smithsonian only discovered the messages in 2009.
That's
A
incredible.
little frozen moment in time, waiting, almost 150 years until it was revealed.
On April 14, 1865, the watch was counting down the minutes of Lincoln's last day. They planned for the future on an idyllic private carriage ride.
And then they come back and they get ready to go to Ford's Theater. They try to bring a number of people to come with. Most people say no.
It's surprising to hear that, because today a presidential invite would almost be a requirement, but apparently not in 1865.
In the end, the Lincolns are accompanied by a young couple, Major Henry Rathbone, a survivor of the Battle of Antietam, and his fiancée, Clara Harris.
They arrive late to the theater.
The play was stopped. They were cheering for him.
The Lincolns sit close together, her hand on his arm. On stage, an uncultured American romances an aristocratic Englishwoman. For the Lincolns, it's a private joke, bringing to mind a certain lawyer born in a log cabin who courted the daughter of a wealthy Kentucky businessman.
You are not used to the manners of a good society.
The moment where the play is full of laughter and a big punchline is coming up, and right as the whole theater bursts into laughter.
You inside-out old gal. Sock-dollar-eyed old man.
In a blink, it is done. Levity melts into horror. Lincoln's future runs out onto the floor with the blood from his wound. As astonishing as it was horrible, it was just one of several attacks across the city, an intended decapitation strike on the U.S. government. Almost exactly 12 hours before, one fateful moment set it into motion. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the killer arrived at the scene of the crime. The president's murderer wasn't a sniper, soldier, or professional assassin. He was an actor.
John Wilkes Booth was 26 years old when he shot Abraham Lincoln.
Booth was a well-known figure on the American stage, renowned as much for his stage fighting as his handsome face. His father and brother were the most famous actors in America. The Booth family was theater royalty.
On the morning of April 14th, Booth is picking up his mail at Ford's Theater. He was a frequent performer there, and the owner of the theater knew him.
The president is coming tonight. Prepare the stage box.
In an instant, a nebulous plan to avenge the South snaps into focus.
He believed that he had one last chance to save the South, and that was to assassinate Abraham Lincoln.
While Lincoln met with his cabinet, John Wilkes Booth cased the presidential box at Ford's Theater.
And of course, a clock was ticking on the fate of the South. If something was to be done to help the South, it needed to be done immediately. So this was a grand confluence of moment and occasion.
He cannot take away my way of life. I will lose my boarding house.
More than a year earlier, in the summer of 1864, Booth was plotting to kidnap the president.
We trade him for our brothers. You take him.
He thought that the South's chances of winning would be improved if he could capture the president and take him as a hostage to Richmond.
Perhaps Booth's bold plan was an attempt to assuage his guilt for taking refuge in the safety of the theater, while 500,000 Southerners died on the battlefield.
He felt like a coward. He personally said to his mother that, you know, I'm a coward. I play a hero, you know, but I just act one. I'm not a real one. And he sat there watching history be made by other young men his age. It was a torment to him.
But by the time of Lincoln's second inauguration, kidnapping wouldn't have helped the collapsing South. On the morning of April 14th, Booth realizes he has a perfect chance to strike a last-ditch blow for the Confederacy. Not to kidnap, but to kill. At Ford's, he could strike his blow for justice on his own turf.
Booth, after all, was an actor. He had performed at Ford's Theater.
Oh, Marco.
18 months before this day, he came face to face with Lincoln on this very stage.
Death is in thine eyes.
Mr. Lincoln, he looked as though he meant that for you.
It is an agony, unbearable by
He
mortal.
rather sharp, he doesn't he?
It is a grief that will kill me.
Booth has no intention of sacrificing himself for the president. He secures the rental of a fast horse for the evening. But Booth is directing a tragedy with more than one antagonist.
We need to talk.
And more than one victim.
This is Abraham Lincoln's office suit. It's also the suit that he was wearing the day of April 14th before going to Ford's Theater.
After the president's death, an artist borrows the suit to paint a portrait of Lincoln. The White House doorman delivers it.
The doorman says you'll notice that the cuffs on this suit are frayed from Abraham Lincoln writing so many pardons over the course of the war.
Just blocks away, his killer is planning the unforgivable. Booth calls on Confederate veteran Lewis Powell.
Wilkes, we can talk.
He was 6 feet tall, well-built, very impressive person of bold purpose. He had fought well and hard during the war. Someone who knew him said in his personal manner he was soft and gentle as a kitten, but at the same time he would have waded through blood if he had to for his cause.
Powell is to kill Lincoln's right-hand man, Secretary of State William Seward.
Why take out Seward? Well, perhaps in Booth's mind, he's kind of the brains behind Lincoln. Lincoln is not thought to be that smart by particularly Confederates, but even lots of Northerners do not think of Lincoln as a scholar.
An epistle?
An invalid, Seward should be easy pickings. But Booth won't stop there.
John Wilkes Booth did not plan just to kill the president. At a minimum, John Wilkes Booth targeted the president, Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State Seward, and General Ulysses Grant.
There you go, Kyle.
Booth is a natural leader. His fame provides a willing cadre of accomplices.
In some ways, there are a number of just sad individuals, bitter, desperate, acting out. Not that different than many of the figures that we know in more recent times that have made assassination attempts of presidents or other world leaders.
The South will crumble if we lose our slaves.
They meet at a boarding house owned by Mary Surratt.
Mary Surratt believed wholeheartedly in the Southern cause. She believed in slavery. She believed in that way of life.
The South is very much interested in retaining this institution that is central to their lives.
The mark of freedom in America was race, and therefore people took a lot of pride in being white.
Mary Surratt knows this collection of men through her son John Surratt Jr., a Confederate courier who is in Canada on April 14th.
Because it was a boarding house, people were coming and going from there. The conspirators were able to meet and not raise any sort of attention, so it was a perfect sort of spy lair.
Booth assigns a second man to help Powell carry out the Seward assassination. An avid bird hunter, David Harold knows the Maryland countryside. He offers the promise of a clean getaway. At 2:30 p.m. on the 14th, Booth brings Surratt a pair of field glasses. She promises to deliver them to her tavern 15 miles south of Washington.
And she did her bidding for John Wilkes Booth, and she went back and waited in her house until the assassination occurred.
Booth travels from Surratt's to the Kirkwood House, the home of Vice President Andrew Johnson and conspirator George Atzerodt. Atzerodt is the 19th century equivalent of an auto mechanic. He owns a carriage repair shop, but he also moonlights on the river, bringing rebel spies into Maryland. Atzerodt isn't at home. Booth leaves a note, but not for George. He writes a message to Vice President Johnson.
I don't wish to disturb you. Are you at home?
The note suggests the unthinkable: collusion between the Vice President and the assassin. Johnson was unpredictable. He got drunk at his own swearing in.
And got up and made an ass of himself.
I had my reasons.
To the embarrassment of everyone, including the president.
Come from humble, or so.
Mary Lincoln believed Johnson and Booth had a connection.
That miserable inebriate Johnson had cognizance of my husband's death. Why was that card of Booth's found in his box? Some acquaintance certainly existed.
They may have even known one another well. As the rumor goes, when Johnson was governor of Tennessee, he had a mistress whose sister was simultaneously seeing none other than John Wilkes Booth. Two sisters, two Southern sympathizers who communicate on the day of the assassination. But Mary Lincoln's suspicions appear to be unfounded. Booth was arranging Johnson's murder.
You always have to have a conspiracy in this stuff, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the Kennedy assassination, but there's always got to be a conspiracy. And the point being here is, why would they be conspiring if Booth was going to kill him? I mean, but anyway, you'll find out in history there's always got to be a conspiracy.
While President and Mrs. Lincoln ride through town, Booth walks the same streets, searching for George Atzerodt. At 4:30 p.m., General Grant and his wife Julia pass Booth in their carriage on their way out of town. Their journey may have saved Grant's life and prevented the assassination of a second U.S. president.
Interesting.
If General Grant had been in the box that evening, I think he might well have killed Grant as well.
Booth locates Atzerodt and orders him to kill Johnson as close to 10:15 p.m. as possible.
Booth's plan was to do all of this kind of more or less simultaneously because he was concerned that if, for example, the president was killed at 9 p.m. and then you tried to kill Seward at 10 p.m. and Johnson at 11 p.m., that guards would have been placed.
But in assigning Atzerodt to kill the vice president, Booth completely misjudged his man. Atzerodt was rather a villainous-looking character, but he wasn't a desperado. He was in for the kidnapping, but not for the murder.
You can do this.
But Booth could be convincing.
You gave your word.
On stage, his brutal fight scenes injured fellow players. His distraught Romeo ripped Juliet's hair out by the roots. His violent Richard III knocked an actor into the orchestra pit. Off stage, he was just as aggressive.
You give your word.
On the season finale of Air Disasters.
Okay, hit the lights there. Does that give you a little bit of an idea where we're at? We'll continue this lecture on Wednesday, and then we'll finish this video, okay? Hope you enjoyed it. It's kind of an interesting story. Kyle, you were all over it today, man.
What is
Alright, let me get my stuff together here. So Kylie, you're good to go. Hiya, Beth, you're good to go. Shania, you're good to go. Daly, you're good to go. You guys, did you say you had some in your locker you had at home? Nick and Cody and
What about Naya's cinema?
I don't know. Sometimes these are nice clothes.
You know what, kids? You'll see all this stuff, the hat and everything, next year when we're in D.C. And you'll know what it means, which will be thrilling to me. Did you see it? Oh. How many have been to, anybody here been to D.C.? Nobody? I had a few that were last year was already there. Yeah, it's really cool, this museum. You get to see the Dr. Samuel Butt's going to fix Booth on his escape, and he's going to cut off his boot and fix his leg, and the boot with the cut is in the museum. It's pretty cool stuff. So what are you guys doing tomorrow that are here?
Nobody.
Well, what are you doing?
We're taking notes.
All right. He's buried in Illinois. But Robert Todd Lincoln, his son they talked about, and his family are all buried in Arlington, and we'll walk right by there grave site. You know what he does? $14.3. No, it's $5.
We barely had one on.
Alright.
They've been to Buffalo.
They're for guys in class. What's that? Oh, these are, hey, I don't think I got enough, so if there's extras, get them over to Soraya.
And before I see her, you can get a penny for all that for $20. Like a bralette. Like a cotton bra.
Hey, kids, hey, let's get under control here, cell phones away. Does everybody have a white sheet and a blue sheet? Now, make sure you read through these and follow this specific format. Might be different than early in the year, so make sure you understand what you're doing on this format. And then those are people, you can pick anyone you want off that list that you'll study next year. These are due at the start of the period, Wednesday, next Wednesday. Do not be late. Start of the period, Wednesday. Jimmy Holt.
Dear Senator,
Yeah.
we have to come to school after the
All right, let me